Today's episode of the No Fence City podcast is brought to you by Questrade. There is a new world of investing where the fees are low and you come first. It's time to switch. Discover Questrade today for do-it-yourself, self-directed investing. They are Canada's fastest growing online brokerage with 21 years experience in the Canadian market, $15 billion in assets under administration, and 8-time winner of Best Managed Companies in Canada. You can discover more at questrade.com. Just hit the link in the description below. It'll take you there. And on to our show. Welcome to the No Fun City podcast, episode 15. 15 episodes in, a lot going on in the world. Corona days. And yet here we are, doing a podcast. No face masks.
It's so nice.
Yeah, and today I'm joined with Tyler Hatch from DFI Forensics right here in Vancouver, but they also have an office in Calgary and Toronto. Today, we're going to be talking about digital forensics, which is something that's really interesting, especially nowadays. So Tyler, for the people out there who don't know, what is digital forensics? What are we looking at here?
Well, I'll go to my party trick, which is, for the sake of simplicity, I always say it's like CSI, but on computers. Mm-hmm. So when something happens, you want to investigate it. You section off the crime scene and you pick up the clues and you tell the story of what happened. So we basically do it in the context of lawsuits, where something has happened and now there's a lawsuit surrounding that event, and we gather up all the evidence and we do an analysis and we tell the factual story that the lawyers can then present in court. And then the other half of what we do is responding to cyber attacks on businesses. So Similarly, when somebody hacks into a network and impacts your company, you need to know what happened, whether they're still there, what information may have been stolen, all these kind of things. So we, again, just help them tell the story. And then once they have that information, they can do more to prevent it from happening again. So in a nutshell, that's what it is.
So do you ever work directly with police and law enforcement, or do you strictly work with, for example, lawyers and clients that are looking to build a case?
Yeah, the law work that we do is mostly civil litigation, so it's not in the criminal context.
Okay.
When it is, we tend to work with the defendant, because the police have their own digital forensics departments. And so when somebody's charged with a crime that involves digital evidence, sometimes we get asked to provide an opinion or analysis based on what the police seized in that case.
Okay.
And then with cyber attacks, we work alongside law enforcement. So we're hired by a company to come in and do a private investigation. But the police often want to know, because there's a criminal element to who's attacking these businesses. So they want to know some details. So we typically share our information with them so that they can keep statistics and dedicate resources to investigating the crime, the criminal aspect of it. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so which of the two aspects do you tend to work on most? Is it the cybercrime that tends to be more popular as far as clients coming to you? Or does it tend to be more on the side of the digital forensic side of things, where, you know, you're working with a defendant who's looking to build a case?
It's predominantly, I would say, more so with the legal aspects of it. But it's been interesting, the shift with Corona, because during the whole coronavirus shutdown, the law courts shut down as well. So some of our legal work kind of stopped, and that part of the business slowed down. But then with all the remote workforces, everybody's working from home. It becomes a lot harder to defend your IT network. So we saw a very dramatic increase in cyber attacks. So then we started doing more of that work. So it remains to be seen how it's going to balance out. Ideally, we'd like to keep it 60-40, 50-50, and grow both aspects of the business, because a lot of people need help in both those areas.
Okay, so why did you get into digital forensics specifically? And then also, why is that sort of like, I don't want to say a thing, but yeah, why?
Kind of.
Yeah, why must I give up for example, for people who may not know how broad digital forensics is, how broad is it? Like, how deep can you go? What are you looking at? Are you looking, for example, we just strictly look at a client's phone and their text messages or what have you? Or is it, we go into their Google, trace where they've been, things like that? Or is it all encompassing, where it could be as broad as going even into a hard drive and searching through data that may have even been deleted?
Right. So we go as far as we need to know, as far as we need to go. Like the beauty of it is that people are so connected. We're using so many devices these days. We all probably have a cell phone, a laptop, maybe even a tablet. We're using the internet. All of these places leave little clues of what you've been doing, who you've been talking to, things you've been scheduling, what you've been researching. It's just a really interesting way of figuring out what somebody's been doing. That's not going to slow down. We're going to trend in that direction for a very long time, where we're relying on technology more. So just like somebody who might leave a fingerprint at a crime scene or a hair sample or anything like that, and that tells something about the event, we're leaving those little digital fingerprints all over the place when we use our phones and our laptops and the internet, and even at work when we're all sharing information that's based on a server. If you access a file and copy it off to a USB thumb drive through your computer, and now you take that to a competitor for 40 grand more a year, that's unlawful theft, and a lawsuit will come out of that. So we tell the story of how that file was accessed, copied off, and transferred outside of an organization to a competitor's organization. So that's a lot of what we do, is that kind of employment law kind of situation. In terms of how I got into it, I actually have a background as a litigation lawyer.
Okay.
So I've always had this thing about fact finding and relying on evidence if I'm going to make a claim in court. Yeah. Because that's just what you have to do. You have to prove your case. So as we did it when I was practicing, you would talk to people, you would take statements and all these kind of things. Well, now you can just sort of look directly at the source. There's almost a transcript that we make as we're interacting with people by text message and various messaging apps like WhatsApp and all these things that we use. When we're posting things all over social media, you can tell where somebody was, what they were doing. I mean, the information you can get on people is so broad and so...
But isn't that also like diving too deep into someone's life? Like, isn't there sort of like some laws around what you can and can't find? I mean, I know you mainly deal with people who are looking for you to help them, but right? Because like if as a defendant, I'm like, hey, I need this data. I need you to show that where I've been or whatever it may be. But does it ever go the other way where you're trying to get information that you're not able to access or you're being prevented to access? And if so, where's the line of you're accessing too much information from the individual or company or whatever it may be? And does that ever come up?
It comes up all the time. And the line is drawn at who owns the device and who is entitled to privacy of the information. So when we're looking, a lot of companies will allow employees to bring their own cell phone into the workplace and use it. And that's great from a company perspective because they don't have to buy the employee the cell phone. But if the employee leaves and they've done something wrong and the evidence might be on their cell phone, you're almost certainly not going to get that cell phone back. You have to go to court to get an order to compel that person to now give us the phone. So the ownership matters. And you might get that order. It's going to be expensive to get it. And by the time you get the phone, there's going to be nothing left on it. The person will wipe it and delete all the relevant evidence. So when we're trying to catch people in a criminal or really bad act, the police will investigate it and they'll seize by force.
Okay.
Where we get cooperation is when somebody says, I've got information on my phone or my computer that will help me in this lawsuit, and I need you to get it out and tell us what all of this means. So we get cooperation from people who own the devices. We also may get a company that has had an employee leave, but the company owns the phone. Yeah. And all of the emails on it are proprietary to the company. So, and all of the data that was used on that phone, because the employee had it in the course of their job, the company can say, this is ours, and you can look at it. Where it gets tricky is with spousal investigations. And these don't come up often, but they do come up occasionally. So you might get one partner asking us to look at their spouse's phone. And we absolutely can't do that. Yeah. A spouse cannot bring in their partner's phone, which the partner owns and is entitled to privacy on, and give us permission to look at it.
Can I give you a curveball?
Yeah.
What if they're under the same shared family plan and the other person pays for the plan?
Right. So that's where I don't think that triggers enough of an ownership in the data.
Really?
Like, because that just allows somebody to access the internet. If it's kind of like, let's say the wife is paying for the phone, you get a 2-year subscription and you get a free phone, for example. That may. So there are gray areas. So depending on the facts, we have to do that analysis. The point is that we have to look at that. We have to consider that. And I think that helps when I have a legal background to sort of, have some expertise and experience in looking at a legal issue like that. So I find that helpful. If I'm unsure, I may ask the spouse to sign off.
Okay.
To sign a form so I have authorization to do an investigation on their phone. And sometimes
but they don't have to sign off.
They don't have to.
Yeah.
But I guarantee you, when spouses reach the point where they're looking at each other's phones,
yeah.
If a spouse says, no, you're not going to look at my phone, that's probably all you need to know. Mm-hmm. Right? That's a pretty good indicator that there's something bad on the phone.
Yeah.
But I'll give you an interesting story, because this recently came up where the wife wanted to look at her husband's. She found a second phone, which is always suspicious. The second phone happened to be hidden under the back seat of a truck or something like that. So found under incredibly suspicious circumstances. So we know that there's things on it. And the wife took possession of it. So we knew that the gentleman didn't have time to delete anything on it. Makes a really great crime scene. Mm-hmm. We know there was going to be good stuff on it. So the issues was ownership. So I had to get the husband to agree in writing for us to do an analysis.
Okay.
But it's also password protected. So, and the husband knows the password and the wife doesn't.
Yeah.
So then, we kind of fooled around with this I can't quite remember thing. And this went on for a little bit of time. And we tried to get a thumbprint, but, because it was biometrically password protected. But because it had been shut down, when you first open it up, you have to, the thumbprint doesn't work. Okay. You have to type in the passcode, which he claimed he didn't remember. And then he withdrew his consent and he lawyered up, and it really got next level kind of
So
crazy.
Does that really affect his case though? Because at the end of the day, we're looking at legal rights.
Yes.
So it's his legal right not to give it to you if he doesn't want to.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
So when it comes down to going to court, can you even play the card of like, well, we asked for his phone, he didn't give it to us, or she didn't give it to us, and that just proves that they're hiding something?
Yeah, I don't think it was really relevant to anything that may have affected their legal rights. Yeah. But what was clear was that maybe there was an exit plan going on, and there was evidence of it on the phone.
Yeah.
So the wife wanted to know, how he was planning to, deal with property that might have been marital property. Like there was issues like that. Mm-hmm. I'm just talking about the mechanics of even getting to the point where we can investigate that information. And it was difficult to get there.
Totally.
And ultimately they agreed that we could look at it and all this other stuff. But it was a difficult mess because there's that issue of who owns it and who's entitled to privacy here.
Yeah.
So it's a very important consideration. And you can't cut corners there, because all of a sudden, if I do something, it's a criminal offense to breach somebody's privacy. So I'm not going to go down that road, for the sake of doing a small investigation. It's just, or even a big one. It's just not something that I'm willing to do. So.
There's actually this past month or last month in New Mexico, there was a sheriff that I guess like he was doing something illegal, or I forget what the whole story was. Someone that he knew stabbed somebody. Mm-hmm. Of that sort. He showed up to the crime scene telling the police to leave and that he'll bring him in or whatever. Mm-hmm. Long story short, he gets involved in the case because why are you protecting this guy? Like, what's going on? What's your relation with this guy? They start asking questions, and then the police want his phone. So they go and it's on YouTube. I'll send you the link. Yeah. You could go watch the entire. It's like a 4-part series of them getting this guy, and it was on the news and everything. They go to the sheriff's office, and of course the deputies and the other under sheriffs and stuff like that, where they weren't even obliged. Like they weren't even going by the law. Like they had a court order stating that we want your phones, the 2 phones that you have, right? As soon as they said that, he passed the phone to the undersheriff, but he did it in front of the police officers. Okay. So they saw him do that. The undersheriff held the phone, but everybody held their position. They're like, you can't come in here. No, we're not giving you anything. So the sheriffs were essentially telling the police, no, we're not doing this, and you guys got to leave. And even the undersheriffs were taking the side of the sheriff instead of the side of the law, which was really surprising. So then they threatened to shut down the entire sheriff's office. Long story short, they eventually get the phones. They find out that the sheriff gave the wrong phone, like a different phone. Like, it wasn't even the same phone that he had used.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Oh, this went on. So by the 4th episode, they finally had him in cuffs. And I watched the whole thing. I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And these days now, especially, I don't know why this always happens. These days now, especially, you look at, for example, the George Floyd case. I'm sure there's digital forensics that'll happen there with maybe the video and I guess tracking and stuff like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you see it more and more often and more evident, obviously, because of the times that we're in and the tech that we have and stuff like that. Is this something that has been around like well before the internet and sort of social media was established, or is digital forensics something that's still fairly new?
It's a bit of both. So it started many, many years ago as just computer forensics when we only had computers, and it was a way to investigate, strictly speaking, computer crime. So malware and these kind of things, and spying and communicating on the internet to do illicit deals and those kinds of things to catch criminal organizations communicating through the digital landscape. But now it's really evolved into a way of getting to the facts. And when I say that, like, I'll give you an example. Like last night, I was having problems with my cell phone provider where I was sending texts and people weren't receiving them until several hours later.
Okay.
So there's now a discrepancy. If that became important when I sent the message and when somebody received it, you have to reconcile those two things, because now two people are telling opposite things. I sent it at 9, you received it at 4 in the morning. Who's telling the truth? Yeah. So my friend said, did you really send me a text at 4 in the morning? I'm like, no, I was asleep. And okay, that makes sense. But say that became a disputed fact. I can verify that because I happen to be wearing a Fitbit.
Okay.
So I showed her my app. I'm like, look, I was asleep at 4 in the morning. I was clearly in a REM pattern. Like, that's just an example of how you can verify one person's story using digital evidence. And that happens all the time in lawsuits, in life. Two people experience things different. They remember it differently. And you have the ability to look at a number of sources to possibly verify one version of events versus another. And it's just a really wonderful way to settle a dispute.
Have you listened to, if anybody's listening to this podcast, don't leave to listen to this other thing I'm about to tell you. Finish this podcast because it's relevant. Then go listen to this podcast. It's a series called To Live and Die in LA. Have you heard this?
I've heard of it.
Okay. The most amazing sort of, I guess you could say, sort of like detective work type of podcast. I don't want to say like the murder mystery type, but it is essentially that. Yeah. Girl goes missing, dies in LA. What happened?
Right.
Was it the boyfriend? Was it this? Was it that? They used digital forensics, and they ended up using Google Maps GPS tracking to find out where everybody was at exact moments in time. Yeah. I'm not going to spoil anything for anybody. Each episode of this podcast is about 40 to 50 minutes, and I blew through it in like 2 or 3 days. And there's like 20 episodes or something. I spent the entire weekend just listening to this. It's very fascinating about how they got there. Now, they didn't get to the digital forensics until later on in the episodes,
right?
But that's what sort of sealed the deal on what the end story was, and what they figured out was this is essentially what happened. You need to listen to that. It's so relevant to what you do.
I'll check that out for sure. When we're trying to figure out what somebody did, how and when, what people don't understand is that using a computer and a cell phone, an operating system logs events. When did you log in? When did you type in your passcode? What was transmitted to what IP address? I mean, these are kind of non-user level stuff that can be very useful in figuring out what exactly happened. So that's really interesting. And so it goes beyond just, I know that I did something. I know I was at a certain place and I know GPS tracked me there. People may not understand that logs of events are really relevant. And when we're doing cyber attack logs of like firewall logs and server logs, like who accessed what, I mean, there's literally hundreds of thousands. It's not sexy in any way. It's brutally boring. But it's really exhilarating when you find that needle in a haystack that tells you exactly when somebody logged in from the other side of the world and got access to your network and dropped a payload, and all this huge event started at precisely this moment. It's really exhilarating for me anyway.
Speaking on that real quick, I wanted to ask you, what about apps that are, for example, embedded? So there are apps like Signal, or I think even Snapchat, like, it deletes the message after you've sent it. So how do you get around things like that? Or do you just, it's like, oh, we can't deal with anything in that app, so it's a lost cause.
Yeah, every app is really unique. And things like Snapchat, where it's designed to delete, there's always a chance that maybe that file exists somewhere, at least in a smaller form or something like that. But it is very challenging to dig through the file system of a smartphone and see if there might be a remnant of a small video or picture that still exists, and how long since the event occurred. These all come into play. Things, even if they're deleted, sometimes you can recover them, but if they're being overwritten by new data that's being collected, it's almost certainly gone forever. So you've got to look at then the size of the memory device on the smartphone. Is it a big hard drive? Is it a bit smaller one? Because that affects how is the user using it? Are they doing a lot of video content that takes up a lot of space, and therefore it might have a better chance of being overwritten? All of those things are kind of important questions to ask initially, because we never want to go needlessly down an expensive, time-consuming road to find nothing. So we have to do a deep dive initially. Okay. But yeah, great question. And end-to-end encryption is interesting because, things like Signal, they're referred to as end-to-end encryption, which is almost deceiving because the actual encryption occurs in the middle during transmission. So you have your one unlock, which is your passcode to the phone. Once it's unlocked and you get a message from somebody in an encrypted communication app, it's no longer encrypted when it reaches your phone.
Okay.
So if you have access to the device, generally you can get access to the encrypted data.
Okay.
Which is why spyware is such a problem, because a lot of spouses after a breakup will install spyware on their partner's phone, and it monitors location, communications, call logs, how many times you're calling a certain person, all of these things. They're horribly invasive. They even track like what you're typing in when you do a Google search.
Yeah.
They're really, really invasive. So that's one of the things. People are like, well, I don't understand how they're seeing this because me and my lawyer are communicating through an encrypted communication app. But once it's on that phone, once it's reached the end destination, it's no longer encrypted. So the spyware also sees it and it transmits it out. So you got to be careful about what exactly is encrypted. It's a really very strong way to secure data while it's in transit. Yeah, for sure.
Beyond encryption, we'll get into drones, what Britt was talking about in a sec. But I know a situation that happened to a friend of mine. I'm not going to name names, but essentially two partners were having issues, and one of them was using the other's iPad to track the iPhone using Find My iPhone app. Yes. So like, it's not just about having your phone on you. You can have your phone on you, but if somebody has the other device that is linked to that phone, you can still be tracked.
Yes,
without even knowing.
Without even
knowing. That person didn't know until eventually they realized, like, how does my partner know, like, everywhere I go, every time, whatever. Couldn't clue in. And then realized, oh, no. The iPad of the other spouse was under the account, Apple account of the, so it was just Find My iPhone.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would just show up.
Yeah. And that's common because spouses often know each other's passwords and passcodes to the devices. And that's why it's so important when a lot of people come in, they're like, I've been hacked. Somebody knows where I am. Well, maybe you haven't necessarily been hacked in the traditional sense. Maybe there's a legitimate explanation of just you're connected somehow.
That's exactly how it happened.
And so, again, I take that role very, very seriously as an expert. We should know the qualifying questions to ask. You know, between, somebody who might not understand technology fully and just assume they've been hacked. Yeah. Maybe there's a few preliminary questions that can help narrow the focus or eliminate some possibilities. So that's what we always try to do initially. We never, because it's a very niche field. Yeah. It can be expensive to do a lengthy, time-consuming investigation. And we never want to needlessly waste people's money or have them spend money without them learning anything new. So we always want to make sure that we've done our homework up front and asked the right questions. So consultations are hugely important. So, but yeah, interesting in terms of things that people don't think about. Like we've mentioned here, drones, for example, anything that carries data and can be remotely controlled, all these things, that's really interesting. Now, there's not a lot of use of drones that's really illicit. We've heard stories of them dropping supplies into prison yards and these kinds of things. But what's been the real change recently is that you're now required to have a pilot license. I mean, there's levels to it, but you have to have some form of a license to operate a drone or most drones in this country.
Yeah.
So say the police seize that drone and you can extract the data and learn exactly when and where it's been flown and maybe by who, because maybe you have to log in. Maybe you're using your phone. A lot of them are controlled by an app on your phone.
Yeah.
That can tell you that this person who did not have a license on Thursday, January 12th, was flying the drone here. I mean, that tells the story perfectly. And if you know that they didn't have a license, then they're charged with a criminal offense. I mean, that's an example of how you can really definitively tell a factual situation using digital evidence. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting
Digital
stuff.
forensics is insane.
Going back, I'm sorry to keep jumping on weird stories, but it's such a great way to exemplify
I got
what
two
we do.
stories too, so I'll let you go. And
I just remember you mentioning the Google, how it tracks GPS. A lot of people don't know when you get a Gmail account and all of a sudden you sync it to your phone that it even collects that information. Many people don't know. By default, it collects it. You can turn it off, but it's interesting. So we had a family law situation where it was a dispute where one party claimed common law status, which would entitle her to certain property sharing or support, whatever the case may be. But it all depended on whether you were living together in a marriage-like relationship for a certain period of time. I think it was like 2 years.
Okay.
One party said, no, we were kind of only seeing each other. She was kind of here occasionally. And the other party was like, no, I lived in this house for like well over 2 years. And we were able to look at the Google account for one of the parties. And Google tracks your default home location and your work location by the number of times that you go there.
And the hours, I assume.
Yeah, and the home was definitely where she said it was. So between the two dramatically different versions of the relationship, one party, we were able to verify very much her version of events by looking at that data. Right. So it was really important to see, yes, almost every day I'm going from work back to this house.
Yeah.
And, so you can clearly see without a question of doubt that this person really did live there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was really, it's just a great way to get information.
Today I saw a news article about the Tim Hortons app. Did you hear this today?
I didn't know.
Apparently the Tim Hortons app has been tracking where you, even when you're not using the app, where you are, where you're going on vacation, where you're working, where your house is, when you're at the Tim Hortons drive-thru. They're collecting all this data. Now, I sort of have like a double-edged sword to this sort of like collection of data. Is it that they're collecting that data and using it? Or is it just the fact that they might be using GPS, for example, to access some features on their app, as a result of which, because of the general aspect of GPS, that data gets collected, like, without even wanting it or needing it. It's just there, right? But they don't access it. Is that the possibility? Or is it more so, no, these types of data collection are deliberate. They have to sort of select it. They have to be picky and choosy about it. Much like end user agreements, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's always sort of like a general thing. Oh, we're collecting your data. We're collecting blah, blah, blah.
Right.
They tell you the gist, but a lot of the times it's generalized. And there might be specifics, or there might be stuff that's not even included, or they don't really look at, but it's there. They have to state it.
Yeah.
Right? So an outside example of this would be when you get like prescription medication or over-the-counter medication. It's like, oh, chances of suicide. Like, odds are you're not, but because of the general standards of pharmacology and all of that jazz, legally they must state that there is a chance that this might happen to you.
Yeah.
So
there's a couple of things going on, and it's very clear what's happening and what the competing interests are. So they're collecting big data from all of us, and what they're doing, they don't care who I am and where I was, the person at 3:00 on Wednesday. What they're doing is they're aggregating everything. So they want to know when do males between the age of 19 and 24 buy coffee. That's the kind of things. And they use that information to then market people and learn. And that's been going on for years. It's just a new way of collecting information. But the balance that needs to happen is that's my data.
Yeah.
I have to give you permission to collect it. And if I don't give you permission, it's a problem. You cannot collect it. And that's where all these laws and things are going to restrict companies from collecting it. And you hear these stories where people haven't authorized that collection, and it's unethical, it's unlawful, and it just shouldn't happen. Right. And it gets scary because if this is what's happening on like a Tim Hortons, imagine what other companies are collecting on us when we don't know. I mean, you could really go deep down the rabbit hole.
But isn't that in their end user agreement before you even sign up? Right?
You would think they would have a legal obation to tell you.
They probably have, correct? Right. Like Tim Hortons isn't stupid. No. Right. They're a national company.
Right.
I'm pretty sure they have good lawyers who know this kind of stuff, right? And so when people complain about, oh, this company was collecting our data this whole time, we didn't know. Is it the fact that they didn't know and they were doing it? Or is it the fact that you didn't read your user agreement to know that they were doing it and then you just found out because somebody told you?
Yeah, exactly. So when we download a new app, yes, there's always that end user agreement. And if you just blindly click through it,
which
you're taking the choice. We all do. Yeah, absolutely. You're taking the chance that you've agreed to something that you don't necessarily agree to. And dealing with that is difficult, but it seems to be the position that if you click, yes, I agree, that's sufficient. Otherwise, you don't use the app. That can be your choice, but there's no middle ground. But the problem is when they go beyond what you've allowed them to do in that end user agreement. And that's where it's scary, when they kind of, take liberties with our freedoms and our privacy. That's a problem. I don't like that at all. And I don't think anybody is comfortable with that. But again, I would say, Apple and Google and Tim Hortons, they don't care about Tyler Hatch, the person. They're just collecting information to plug it into a giant big data machine to then sell it to companies who may want to know the demographics of a particular user. Okay. But the other thing was when you install an app, you should be able to say, GPS, for example, I only allow that when I'm using the app. Yeah. So if it's tracking you at all times, then again, they're going outside of the scope of what you've authorized them to do. And that's a problem. So definitely. It's always, and the problem is that we don't know it's being collected until somebody gets caught with their hand in the cookie jar. Yeah. That's what really is the problem. So how do you monitor it?
Okay. Is there a legal system or a party that oversees like a general consensus of end user agreements with technological apps that sort of request this kind of data and makes sure that everybody is sort of like on this page, or points fingers at companies that are, or is it just some random person figures this out, or there's a whistleblower and then we find out?
I think it's all of that. So there's regulatory bodies who govern privacy and things, and they investigate and you're supposed to report to them. But there's also legislation that's passed by government. So it's slow moving to evolve. And then when there's a dispute, you're kind of left generally with the court forum and a legal analysis. So when we're talking about an end user agreement that we're clicking on an app and we're applying law from 18th century England, where things were written out on dipped ink pens, it's very different. And sometimes the legal principles don't always apply nicely to 2020 digital interactions. So it becomes a problem. And the whole end user agreement has been heavily litigated. I think it was with the Uber drivers. Okay. So there's a huge employment law question, or at least there was maybe a year ago, about whether they're employees such that they should be treated, for minimum wage and benefits and these kinds of things, or are they independent contractors? And so the whole issue was, well, in our user agreement, Uber said, we clearly set out that you're an independent contractor. And if you download the app and you sign up to be a driver and you hit I agree, that's the end of it. We're entitled to rely on our contract. But the Uber drivers were saying, well, no, that's not really fair because it's really something else. And even though the contract sets it out, we just click yes to agree. We didn't read it. It's 18 pages long. Like you said, like nobody actually reads those things. We just click through. So the question is that the right law to apply to the current situation? And I don't know if the answer has been resolved, but you can see the distinction there between applying old principles to modern day technology. It doesn't always jive.
I'm going to go back to what you talked about when you mentioned the USB. Because there's a very interesting thing that happened, probably like over 10 years ago, where Iran and the whole nuclear thing that was going on, right, between Iran and the United States, right? Iran wanted to sort of like start their nuclear program. Yep. U.S. was like, no, because weapons and whatever, right? Now, whether they were going to use it to do weapons or what, like, is beyond me. But Iran was working on a nuclear program, and they had these turbines or thrusters or whatever that had to activate. They would keep activating, but then they would spin out of control and essentially like blow to pieces or whatever it may be. They couldn't figure out what the problem was, so they would fire that scientist, hire another engineer or whatever to take over. Same thing would keep happening. They couldn't figure it out. Years later, at a TEDx conference, a guy who does essentially cybersecurity, digital forensics, that kind of stuff for the American government at the time, comes out and talks about how they were able to manipulate the turbine thruster, the turbine things, or whatever it may be. I don't know the technology behind it, for the nuclear sort of devices that Iran was working on in order to prevent them from actually continuing on or working or whatever it may be. So the way they did that was they had a inside source or a spy essentially take a USB stick and just place it on a table somewhere.
Oh, that's interesting. Huh.
And the reason why they did that was because they knew what's the first thing you do when you find a USB stick on a table?
What's on it?
You plug it in to
How do you find out what's on it without
what's
plugging
on
it
or whose is it or whatever, right? And of course, when they did that, now the United States government has access to that entire network without them even knowing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the legalities, I don't know. Obviously, it's got to be illegal on some fronts. You can't just do that. But whether or not it's an international act of war or a privacy, like I don't know what rubric of the law that falls under, but it's obviously illegal. You can't do that. And nowadays we're hearing a lot of talk about state-sponsored attacks, and that's what we're talking about. When one state wants to disrupt another state, and they don't want to drop a big bomb that's going to be publicized on the news, they're doing this kind of stuff. They're using cyber attack methods to disrupt power, supply chains, that cripple a nation. Right? It's an act of war in some sense that's being perpetrated through digital means. So it really gets high level. But that's fairly specific. And then some states, that want to generate, say, a nuclear program that's really expensive and they don't have the money to do it. Maybe they're getting involved in some state-sponsored ransomware attacks. So they'll work with a criminal organization and they'll hit companies across North America and they'll collect the ransom. And before you know it, they've got a huge pile of money to then initiate some program. That's another example. And then that stuff is very much going on. Yeah. What the day-to-day stuff, when you're a company in Canada that gets hit with a ransomware attack and you have to pay a bunch of money, possibly, generally it's not a state-sponsored attack, as far as I know. It's generally criminal organizations from across the world that are highly skilled, highly organized, and they're making money hand over fist, like ridiculous amounts of money. Yeah. It's that kind of organized crime has long since surpassed the drug trade as the most profitable criminal enterprise in the world.
So who has that job?
The job to detect it or the job to run it? We're talking mafia. We're talking a lot of it's going on overseas. Russian, Chinese, Korea, there's Middle East stuff happening. I mean, it's happening a lot, and it probably happens in America too. But yeah, these organizations are just making incredible. We've seen them retire to desert islands and release their technology, and we've made enough money, we're out. They don't need to keep going. It's crazy.
Today, I guess it was yesterday. The Canadian government. You remember the whole scandal with Quadriga, the cryptocurrency platform, the Canadian cryptocurrency platform?
Is he the one that died and left? I think,
Did he die?
That's right. Yeah, no, there's a question about whether he... Yes, exactly. Okay, I'm familiar.
So, to be fair, I used Quadriga. I didn't lose any money, though. Luckily, I had moved my funds to another platform before any of this went down because I tried to remove cash, and it's supposed to take a few days, and it took 3 months for me to get my cash. After that, me and my buddies were like, oh, something's up. This isn't right. If it took 3 months to get that money, so we decided, don't use it and move the platform. Literally, I think it was a month and a half after I moved, thankfully, off the platform, they got shut down. So the other day, and this is, I guess, a year and a half or a year later, the Canadian government found out that for sure 100% Quadriga was a Ponzi scheme, right? They just funneled the cash into the platform and then the cryptocurrency into the platform, moved it into a hard wallet and a cold wallet, and then now nobody has access to it. It was a total of $160 million.
It's a lot of money.
Dollars. So what's the repercussions of that on an individual who is apparently dead? And how, like, for example, how would they go about tracking the currency from here on? Because let's say I had $160 million sitting in Bitcoin. Well, at some point I'm going to want to use that money.
Right.
So is there a way, especially with cryptocurrency that we know tends to be, I mean, you could track all of the payments and all of the transactions on public ledger.
Right.
So that's not really an issue, but actually tracking the cash flow and where it's going, is that possible or no?
It's got to be. I don't know in this particular case, but you can see what we're talking about now is traditional victims of that kind of scenario would go after the high levels of that scheme, and the money would be somewhere. Like, there would be physical cash or there would be deposits in a bank account, but we all understand cash and money and bank accounts. But this whole now, as difficult it is to get that money back, now we have to deal with the additional issue that it's cryptocurrency, which people don't understand. And yes, we can track a public ledger and transactions and all this kind of stuff, but where is it? And more importantly, what is it? What is digital currency to most people? They don't understand it. It's not a physical thing. It's just sort of, it's really difficult to wrap your head around. And then as a victim to go down that road, and the legal community doesn't necessarily understand most of them. Some are specialists in cryptocurrency. I would say it's probably accurate to say most lawyers in North America don't have a good understanding of what cryptocurrency is. So for them to take a case and say, yes, I can get your money back, they don't really know what to do. So they need expertise from people. And that's, cryptocurrency comes up occasionally in our line of work, but not often. I expect it will in the future. I'm surprised it hasn't to a greater degree yet.
Well, I think it's because mainly right now cryptocurrency is being used by like institutions and big money. It's not everyday people that are using it yet. You're not seeing like debit transactions with crypto yet. So I think when it comes to the general public, the use is very seldom. I use it in certain cases, but not all cases. Like I don't go buy my coffee with it. I wish I could. It would be cool. But I don't mind that I can't. But in other cases, like I will use cryptocurrency if I have to send money from one place to another, and let's say it's like a couple $1,000s and I don't want to pay a hefty transaction fee. Well, I'll just use crypto because it'll be like 5 cents, equal to 5 cents, right?
And that's the whole concept of decentralizing. So you don't have to convert. You can make worldwide transactions, and as business and the world gets more global and smaller through digital interaction, that kind of technology is going to be really useful. And I think people will see the benefit in it. But for now, it's got the impression that it's only used for illicit purposes. There's a lot of suspicion behind it. And I don't think that's unfair right now, because it is. I mean, any ransomware attack is not paid in cash.
Of course.
We're all, because that's the whole point. You can
even recently
you can send
all the phone calls. Send it to us in Bitcoin.
Of course, because
you're going to jail.
You get an anonymous wallet that's untraceable. You don't have to be identified. So there are problems with it too, but by and large, it's good technology, and we don't want to throw it away lightly.
Oh, I agree. A lot of times, especially when it comes to unverified, it's usually up to a certain amount per day, right? But that's still it could be like upwards of the $20,000 range in one day that you could do a transaction unverified. Other than that, they do verify you. Like I have 2 verified accounts and 1 unverified. The unverified is just for like quick, right? And the verified ones are, the big ones, right?
So there's a couple of things that I find really hilarious about verifying a cryptocurrency wallet.
Don't scare me.
First of all, it's how it's done. Like, I don't know. So I have because when we do a ransomware, we respond to a ransomware attack, and the decision makers in the organization are like, you know what? We have no other choice. Let's pay the money. They think that you just send a check or an e-transfer. No, you've got to actually fund a cryptocurrency wallet. And if it's not verified, so we have one that clients can use. They can fund the wallet and we can get the payment up and out really quickly because I've verified it. Right. And most companies don't. And it takes a long time to verify. It takes several days. So if you need to do it right now, you better have access to one. but it always makes me laugh how I had to verify. I had to actually take a picture of myself with a handwritten sign. It's the most
sign it
for this
hold your passport
ultra secure way of transacting money.
Yeah,
it seemed like the silliest way to verify my identity.
It was
really hilarious.
Actually. I never understood that either. But I'm like, well, it is what it is. Like, I guess this is how we're doing this. Right? Yeah. But going back on Bitcoin or crypto being, because I'm a fan of crypto, but this is the last of crypto we'll talk, because I talk about crypto all the time, is the fact that it's illicit. A lot of people say, oh, drug money, this and that. There's more drug money in real estate. There's more drug money in casinos. There's more drug money in Vancouver real estate and casinos than there is in my opinion, and I'm sure in data will show, in the entirety of cryptocurrency. So my point is, like, there is illicit money in every aspect.
Yes.
People aren't laundering money just in Bitcoin and this. Sure, it's one avenue, but I promise you there are also even bank accounts, because bank accounts, you could be smart with it. Deposit or send less than $9,999. Everyone knows that number, because as long as it's not 10,000, it's not going to get flagged. Right. Or, you have a limit of 10,000 anyway, so you got to only do the 9,900. So there are ways around even the banking system that's flawed, right? So when it comes down to illicit money or drug money or laundering money and Bitcoin, I'm like, that's everywhere.
It is everywhere.
That's just like saying, crime happens and these type of stores get robbed. No, all stores could get robbed, right? It's just maybe jewelry stores are more likely because of XYZ, right? So that's my whole thing when it comes to crypto and crypto scams or whatever. It's like, when it comes to things like Quadriga, that's just knowledge, in my opinion. If you're dumb enough to put your money somewhere, like I was, right? And then you see that you're not getting your money back, what's the first thing you should do? Move your funds, which is exactly what I did. But a lot of people didn't. Yeah. $160 million worth of people didn't. What are the odds that person will get something back, like via the government?
Seems pretty slim. I mean, there's no government intervention when it's a private transaction. There's no government bailout for a bad investment, whether it's crypto or real estate or the stock market. So, I mean, and you got to remember, it's incredibly expensive to sue somebody. It's incredibly expensive. You have to be going for a large amount of money. So when you have a lot of $60 million, is quite a bit, and that's where class actions come in. That's exactly where you have thousands and thousands of people who maybe invested a few $100s or a few thousand. It makes sense to form a class and go after. But again, you've got to consider: is there something to get at the end? So when these involve like pharmaceutical companies and drugs and side effects, you see a lot of class actions in that context. That's because these people have deep pockets, and you're going to be able to get something as long as you get that judgment. So it's worthwhile to pursue. But going after this uncertain Ponzi scheme where there's challenges in proving the claim, and then at the end of the day, you've got nothing but a suspicious wallet that may contain money that you may be able to get, and then you have to convert it back to cash. I mean, the likelihood seems pretty remote to me, but I don't honestly know enough about the law or that particular case to really make a truly informed decision, or opinion, but I suspect it would be pretty slim.
Now let's quickly talk about your podcast, because you do have a podcast. Kind of went on hiatus, right?
I did, yeah.
But are you going to continue it? Are you starting a new one? What's going to happen here?
Well, both actually.
And wait, real quick, talk about what your podcast is.
Yeah, so I wanted to start a podcast that was solely focused on digital forensics, because it's a great way to get information out about what we do. And like I said, when I talk about what I do, it's so helpful to have examples so that people can understand. So getting some content out there about what we do was awesome. I love doing podcasts, and I tried to then have a lot of guests on who are end users of digital forensics. So I interviewed a lot of lawyers and a lot of people who deal with cybersecurity and cyber attacks. And I got to tell you, man, I love talking to people. I love getting to know people and how they got into the profession and these kinds of things. It's just a really great way to meet new people and hear stories. I learned a ton. I feel I educated a few people. I certainly made great connections, like on LinkedIn. And, one of the greatest connections for me was somebody started following the podcast and commenting and liking and sharing on LinkedIn when I would post a new episode. And it was this Defeat the Breach .org organization. It's a coalition of people that started in the States.
Okay.
And they just wanted to raise awareness about cybersecurity, which is so important because a lot of people just don't know what to do. They know it's a problem, but they don't know what to do. So this coalition formed, and it was a great fit for me to get involved. So now I'm part of the coalition as well as one of the primary members. And it's defeatthebreach.org, and it's just an awareness campaign where people can go to one place and learn about how to stop cyber attacks, what you can do, the different pieces that go into place. The reason why it's a coalition is because there are many factors that need to go in. People have to have a good IT provider. When a data breach happens and you need to communicate to your employees or your clients or the public, you have to get a PR firm involved. So they're part of that. Okay. There's a legal aspect to understanding what are my obligations to report a data breach to the clients or to the government. So there's a legal firm involved in the coalition, and then of course us as a forensics and incident response handling firm. I would definitely encourage people to go on defeatthebreach.org. I've had them on the podcast, really cool stuff. Doing the podcast was great. It's called the Digital Forensics Files podcast. It's on all the major platforms. I host it on Anchor FM.
Nice, yeah. I host on Anchor.
Yeah, it's really great. And so it's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And yeah, it was a really great way. So I had to take a step back from it because I want to do it really well. And that takes a lot of time. And so I needed to focus on the business, and I didn't want to take my eye off the ball because we're almost 2 years into this and we're doing really well. And I wanted to make sure that the business was healthy and growing. So I took a break, but yeah, I'm lining up some more guests and content for the near future. Going to fire it up for season 2 and go from there. But because it's so limited to my field, which is very niche, even among people who are in the field. So I wanted to kind of have the ability to expand. So I started a recent podcast. Not a lot of content yet. The Bearded Ginger, just a little fun thing for my own personal amusement.
Yeah.
Talk about some fun stuff, just more of a lighthearted personal pursuit. Because
nice. Is it a solo really cast fun. Or is that one also sort of interview?
That was going to be a bit of both. I just kind of want to get out shorter, kind of, fun, informative, like just for fun. You know? So sometimes I just, do my own thing. Sometimes I have guests. I'm going to do some Instagram live stuff and just, nice. Do a whole bunch of things. Hopefully interact more with people rather than just informative business style podcast. So I'm really looking forward to firing that up. So
that's awesome.
So far, I don't have much more than a really cool intro video.
Yeah.
With some pretty awesome sound effects.
That's okay.
It's a good start.
Yeah, you got to start somewhere. Yeah, it's like you got to build up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I find if you try to make it perfect the first time, it's just not going to work because there's so many elements. Even with me, every time I do the podcast, I make a slight mod.
Yeah.
Or I didn't like this. Let's try this time. And just as we go, you see it sort of get more finesse. So I look forward to seeing this new podcast develop.
Yeah, I'll definitely share the links with you. But yeah, podcasting is awesome, and I really thank you for having us here. And
dude, thank you for coming out. I know you got to go, and we got to end the conversation, but it'd be cool to have you back. Maybe like a year from now or something, continue this conversation and talk about new stuff in digital forensics. Because there was a topic that I wanted to touch base on, which was legal when it comes to social media. I had a conversation with a lawyer about a year and a half ago, and talking to you sparked that conversation back. And his whole idea was who owns the rights to your social media? Like, for example, when you pass away or even before that, what's this guy's name? Harvey? No.
He's going away for a while.
Black comedian, Steve Harvey.
Steve Harvey. Yes. Okay.
So Steve Harvey has a Facebook account. Like, Facebook page or whatever. When he was on like the Steve Harvey show or whatever they made it for him. But he doesn't own that account, and he does not post in it, and he doesn't have the password or username. He can't do anything with that. But it's his official account, and a third party owns it. So that was like one example. The other example the individual gave was, when you pass away, like, what happens to your Facebook? What if you have 5 million followers? Can somebody sell that? Can you sell your Instagram page? Or does Instagram own it? Should Instagram get a fee of that if you do that? Like, super interesting. I love talking about that kind of stuff. So I think like in the upcoming years, this is going to be a new form of law that kind of opens that isn't there yet. You see a trail of it, but it's not there yet, right? Yeah. So you're going to have to come back. We're going to have to wait and see what happens, and we're going to have to talk about that. But,
I'd love to, yeah. Anytime, let's do it.
Thank you for coming out. Much appreciated. And I guess wait, do you have any final words? Anything you want to say?
No, if anybody wants to follow up with us, like specifically in terms of professional capacity, just look for DFI Forensics. Our website's dfiforensics.ca. We're all on social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. You can find us. We're not hard to find. So yeah, awesome. Love to talk to people all the time. So
perfect. So
yeah,
this is the end of the No Fun City podcast, episode 15. Peace out. That's it.
Whoa.
Nice, my friend. Well done.
Today's episode of the No Fun City podcast is brought to you by Questrade. There is a new world of investing where the fees are low and you come first. It's time to switch. Discover Questrade today for do-it-yourself, self-directed investing. They are Canada's fastest growing online brokerage with 21 years experience in the Canadian market, $15 billion in assets under administration, and 8-time winner of Best Managed Companies in Canada. You can discover more at questrade.com.